The moment you feel fear, most people shrink. Caesar expanded. Picture it. The year is 49 BC. Caesar stands at the edge of the Rubicon River. Behind him, his legions. Before him, Rome. The law of the Republic is absolute. Cross this river with an armed force, and you are an enemy of the state. Death, exile, erasure. Every general before him had stopped here. Every rational mind in his camp begged him to turn back. The fear was real. The stakes were total. And Caesar smiled. Then he crossed. Here is what nobody tells you about fear. Fear is not the enemy of greatness. Fear is the price of admission. The men who conquered empires, shattered civilizations, rewrote the entire map of the human world. They were not fearless. They were fear-literate. They learned to read fear, like a compass pointing directly at the thing they were meant to do next. Caesar didn't just understand this intellectually. He engineered his entire psychology around it. And today we are going to dissect that psychology, not as history, not as biography, but as a manual, because the same terror that froze his enemies alive, that exact biological cocktail of cortisol and adrenaline that makes your hands shake and your vision narrow. Caesar used it like rocket fuel. Let's begin. First, you need to understand what fear actually is at the hardware level. Your amygdala, a small, ancient, reptilian cluster deep in your brain, cannot distinguish between a lion in the grass and a decision that will change your life. To your nervous system, they feel identical. Your heart rate spikes. Your palms sweat. Your brain floods with one single message on repeat. Do not move. Stay safe. Stay small. This is the default setting of the human animal. And for 99% of people, that setting runs unchallenged their entire life. They feel the fear. They interpret it as a stop sign, and they stop. They don't cross the river. They don't take the stage. They don't make the call. They die with the empire still inside them. Caesar had a different interpretation. He understood, with the cold clarity of a man who had been nearly drowned, nearly enslaved, nearly executed before he was 30. That fear is not a stop sign. Fear is a spotlight. It illuminates exactly what matters. The things that don't matter don't scare you. Nobody lies awake terrified about what they had for breakfast. Fear only shows up when the stakes are real, when the outcome is real, when the version of you on the other side of that decision is unrecognizably greater than the version standing here, frozen, right now. Caesar learned to chase the fear, not despite what it meant, because of it. At 19 years old, Julius Caesar was captured by pirates. Not metaphorical pirates. Actual, murderous, Mediterranean pirates who ransomed wealthy Romans for profit. They demanded 20 talents of silver for his release. Caesar laughed in their faces and told them to ask for 50. Because he was worth more than their opening offer, and he refused to let even his captors underestimate him. He spent 38 days among them. He exercised on their ship. He wrote poetry and read it aloud, and mocked them when they didn't appreciate it. He told them, casually, as if commenting on the weather, that when he was released, he would return with a fleet and crucify every single one of them. They laughed. He was released. He raised a fleet. He found them. He crucified them. Do you understand what this reveals about his psychology? He was a teenager, a prisoner, with zero power and zero leverage, and he was already operating from the frame of a conqueror, not because he felt no fear, but because he refused to let fear determine his identity. Most people in that situation, would shrink, would appease, would try to seem harmless, unthreatening, forgettable, anything to survive. That is the fear management strategy of the prey animal. Make yourself small so the predator loses interest. Caesar made himself larger. He made himself memorable. He planted a flag in the future and then dragged himself toward it by force of will. This is the first principle. Fear shows you what you're capable of becoming. Your job is to act from that future version of yourself, right now, before you have earned it, before you have the credentials, before anyone has given you permission. Caesar gave himself permission. At 19, on a pirate ship, in chains. Now, let's talk about what Caesar did with doubt, because fear and doubt are twins, and you cannot master one without understanding the other. In 60 BC, Caesar was a middle-aged politician with significant debts, significant enemies, and significant ambition. Rome's power was controlled by two men, Pompey, the great general, beloved by the armies, and Crassus, the richest man in the world. Either one of them could have crushed Caesar like an insect. The conventional strategy would have been to choose a side, to submit, to attach yourself to the stronger horse and hope for scraps. Caesar did something that made the entire Roman Senate hold its breath. He allied with both of them simultaneously. He manufactured a three-way power-sharing agreement, the first triumvirate, that made him equal in influence to two men who each individually dwarfed him. He borrowed Crassus's money. He married his daughter to Pompey's ally. He used their combined weight to have himself appointed governor of Gaul. And then he left Rome and spent 8 years conquering a territory the size of Western Europe. When he came back, he was no longer the junior partner. He was the most famous man alive, commanding the most battle-hardened army in Roman history, beloved by his soldiers, with a ferocity that went beyond military loyalty into something closer to devotion. He had turned a position of weakness into the foundation for absolute power. Not by playing it safe, by identifying exactly what his enemy's strength was, their comfort, their arrogance, their assumption that he would stay in his lane, and using that assumption as the door he walked through. This is the second principle. Your enemy's certainty about your limitations is your greatest strategic asset. Let them believe the ceiling is low. Work underneath it. Then remove it. But here is where Caesar's psychology becomes truly dangerous to understand, and dangerous not to understand. He was not reckless. This is the critical distinction that most people miss when they study great conquerors. They see the boldness, and they call it courage, and they try to imitate the surface, the crossing of the Rubicon, the gambling with everything on a single throw. What they miss is the 10,000 hours of preparation underneath that moment. Caesar was an obsessive student of everything: military strategy, law, rhetoric, engineering. He was one of the greatest orators in Rome in an era when Cicero existed. He personally supervised the construction of bridges and siege engines. He wrote his own histories. He studied his enemies with the dispassionate focus of a surgeon studying anatomy. The boldness was never impulsiveness. It was the confidence of a man who had done the work that others had not. When he crossed the Rubicon, he had already war-gamed the scenario 100 times. He knew Pompey's supply lines. He knew the Senate's political divisions. He knew exactly which legions would defect and which would hold. The gamble was not a gamble. It was a calculated certainty dressed in the costume of audacity. This is the third principle. Real courage is not the absence of preparation. It is preparation so thorough that fear becomes data rather than paralysis. You do not eliminate the fear. You earn the right to act through it because you have done what the frightened man has not. The terrified man improvises. The dangerous man executes. And then there is the matter of how Caesar treated failure, because he failed spectacularly, repeatedly. His first campaign in Britain was a military disaster. He lost ships to storms. He misjudged the tides. He barely escaped with his legions intact. Rome heard about it, and the political vultures began to circle. Caesar wrote about it himself, in his own dispatches, in detail. This is something that should stop you cold. He did not spin it. He did not suppress it. He documented his failures in first-person Latin and sent those documents to Rome for the Senate to read. And within a year, he was back in Britain with a larger force, better intelligence, and a campaign that went decisively in his favor. Why did he expose his own failures? Because Caesar understood something about power that most people spend their entire lives getting backwards, hiding failure signals, insecurity, owning failure signals dominance. A man who can look at his own catastrophe with clear eyes and say, "Here is what happened. Here is what I learned. Here is what I will do differently." That man cannot be destabilized by enemies pointing at his failures. He has already pointed at them himself. You cannot wound a man with a knife he is already holding. This is the fourth principle. Integrate your failures before your enemies can weaponize them. The willingness to own your defeats completely is not weakness. It is the most psychologically aggressive move available to you. It leaves your critics with nothing. Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, 44 BC, 23 stab wounds. Senators he had pardoned, men he had elevated, friends. And this is the final lesson, the one that costs the most to understand. Caesar had been warned multiple times, specific warnings. His wife dreamed of it. A soothsayer told him to his face. His friends begged him not to go to the Senate that morning. He went anyway. Not because he was suicidal, not because he was naive, but because at a certain point, a man who has lived entirely by the philosophy of meeting fear with forward motion cannot stop moving without ceasing to be himself. Caesar going to the Senate that morning was not a mistake. It was the logical conclusion of a life spent refusing to let fear make decisions. You may argue that it was the wrong decision. History is free to judge. But understand what it represents psychologically. He had built an identity so completely around the refusal to retreat that even at the ultimate stakes, he held the frame. His last words, if Suetonius is to be believed, were not a plea, not a defense, not an explanation. He pulled his toga over his face so he would die with dignity. Even then, especially then, he controlled the frame. Here is the challenge. For the next 7 days, every time you feel fear about a decision, notice it. Do not manage it. Do not breathe through it. Do not talk yourself out of it. Ask one question only. What does this fear mean I am capable of? Not what does it mean I should avoid. What does it mean I am capable of? That reframe is the entire architecture of Caesar's psychology compressed into a single question. Fear as a compass, failure as data, doubt as proof of stakes worth playing for, and the relentless, almost inhuman forward motion of a man who decided very early, on a pirate ship, in chains as a teenager, who he was going to become. The Rubicon is different for every person, but it is always there, and it is always the same choice. Cross it, or spend your life on the safe bank, watching the water. The empire